With the 2022 season finally coming to an end, that means that it's time to do my traditional top 5 best and top 5 worst drivers of 2022. These videos are always so much fun to do because I love ranking and listing drivers. They always get a little bit controversial, and it's always a lot of fun to see what you think in the comments box below. So for this one, it's going to be the top 5 best drivers of 2022, and for the next one, it will be my top 5 worst drivers. So don't forget to let me know your top 5s in the comments box below. And now really quickly, before we do get into my top 5, I did actually want to give a shout out and a few honourable mentions to drivers that maybe just missed out on my top 5, but I still think they had incredible seasons, so I thought they deserved at least a bit of a mention. I'm thinking of drivers like George Russell, Esteban Ocon, Sebastian Vettel, and even Valtteri Bottas. I mean, especially when it comes to Bottas and Vettel, it was kind of the opposite a little bit. Valtteri had an amazing kind of first half of the season, but then the car kind of tailed off. And as far as Seb, he's had an amazing second half of the season, but unfortunately at the beginning of the season, the Aston Martin just wasn't quite there. And then in terms of drivers like Ocon and Russell, they've been quite, of course they've had their ups and downs, but they've been unbelievably consistent throughout the entire year. And again, they just miss out on my top 5. But yeah, I thought all of those drivers have had, in their own kind of individual way and under their own circumstances and pressure, I thought all of them have had a really good 2022. But yeah, so that's why I wanted to give them an honourable mention at the very least. They might not be in my top 5, but I thought they've had incredible 2022 seasons. First up, and in 5th place, I have got Sir Lewis Hamilton. Now, for each of these drivers on the screen, I'm going to have some stats in terms of what they achieved in the championship, their wins, their poles, their podiums, and also their head-to-heads versus their teammate. Now, I'm not going to talk too much about the stats for each of the drivers. It will just be on the screen for for you to compare. I will say though, for the race head-to-heads, this is only when both of the drivers have got to the checkered flag. Now, that's not a perfect metric, but it kind of eliminates some of the reliability issues, and I just thought it would be interesting to kind of see what the head-to-heads were when both of the drivers reached the checkered flag with kind of no issues that prevented them from finishing. So yeah, Lewis in 5th. Now, I think to some people this might actually be a little bit controversial. Now, to me, it's never, and you'll see with a driver a little bit further up the list, to me, it's never just about the points. I think to me, a judgment of my top 5 best drivers is like the eye test, most importantly, and who actually is the most complete package or has been the most complete package both on and off the track, and also just in terms of speed as well. Now, again, I wanted to give George a shout out because I think he's had an incredible season, and there's almost like this rhetoric when it comes to Lewis versus George, and the fact that George has outscored Lewis, that you've either got to kind of downplay one driver's season to kind of uplift the other, and you can't kind of say that both of them had incredible seasons. I think the reason why, I wanted to give George a shout out, and the reason why Lewis is only in 5th is because I do feel like they've been unbelievably close. And I think I think the biggest reason for that is that I do think that Mercedes have the best driver lineup on the field. What they've done with that Mercedes W13, especially after their early season struggles, to be pushing Ferrari for P2 in the Constructors, I feel like that is a symptom of a great driver lineup. That is purely, I think, why they have the best driver lineup on the grid. To be pushing Ferrari at the end of the season, I thought was just incredible. Now, again, when it comes to the race head-to-heads, it's actually George Russell that beat Lewis by 1 race. So, maybe you could argue that George has been the better driver, but the thing that really did it for me is that I still think Lewis has the speed over George Russell, and I feel like over the course of the season, he has been the quicker driver. I think, however, the one thing for Lewis that has gone against him is key moments of bad luck in races where the opportunity was on the table. And I think the 2 races that really kind of go back to my mind is both Spain and Hungary. In both of those races, I think Lewis showed pace that he could have won both of those Grand Prix. Whilst when you look at George, especially in Hungary, he didn't quite have he didn't quite manage his tyres right. Obviously, that was his first pole position, but both of those races, just something went up against Lewis that was kind of almost out of his control. In lap 1 in Spain, he had that collision with K-Mag, which I do think was a little bit more on K-Mag, and obviously he got sent to the back of the grid. And then obviously in Hungary, Lewis actually looked like he had the pace over George Russell throughout the qualifying sessions, and then in Q3, his DRS fails, and I think he started in like 10th or something. So yeah, at key moments in the season, I feel like Lewis is kind of really lost out. And don't get me wrong, it's not been a perfect Lewis Hamilton season. I think he's made mistakes, there's no doubt about it. I think Spa was a big hit actually, because I think he would have been on the podium and perhaps even jumped George Russell in the championship. And even races like Singapore, I thought that was a really weak kind of Lewis performance. And then you also have to talk about obviously what they've mentioned at the beginning of the season in terms of Lewis kind of running a bit kind of alternative setups and, you know, running a compromised car to gather data for the team and kind of get more knowledge about the W13 when they're kind of developing and learning about it. How much, obviously Lewis and Toto have both talked about that, but how much you kind of credit that to Lewis's early struggles, that kind of depends on your judgment. And obviously if you don't give, you know, if you don't feel like that should have been an excuse, then that is totally fair enough. But I feel like to me, the eye test is still the most important. And that's why I still think that Lewis has been a better driver, both on and off the track as a team leader, the experienced driver that he is, you know, 7-time world champion, and he still has the speed. I did a video recently, actually, very recently, a few videos ago where I ranked all of the 20 drivers in kind of my own tier list, and spoiler alert, I had Max Verstappen and Lewis Hamilton on the same tier. I still think that as a package, and you know, maybe the qualifying record also shows that Lewis just had a bit more of the edge when, you know, kind of everything was was on a bit more kind of level playing field over George. So all of that kind of just put you know, Lewis above George in my opinion, and also put him in this top 5 because even though this hasn't been his best ever season, I think the speed is still there. I think the maturity and the experience of the world champion that he is, I think it showed a lot this season and how he had to lead the team through a difficult season. And again, this is taking nothing away from George, just taking nothing away from Lewis in terms of George not being above him. These are two drivers who absolutely maximized what that car could give them. And again, just the fact that both of them pushed Ferrari for that P2 in the Constructors, I think it shows that both of them are class drivers. But yeah, even though Lewis didn't quite get it done in the championship over Georgian, that's going to be a bit of a theme with the next driver on the list, which is a bit of a spoiler. I think in terms of speed, in terms of how he carried himself throughout the entire season, I still feel like he's one of the best drivers on the grid. I still feel like he has the edge over George, and that's why I've got him in my top 5. In 4th place, I have got the driver that I was alluding to a little bit earlier, and that is Fernando Alonso. Now, it is really strange to kind of have two drivers, and I'm talking about both Lewis and Fernando kind of back to back, when both of them were beaten by their teammates in a championship, but I think for kind of similar and different reasons all at the same time, I don't think the championship table really kind of tells you the full picture of how these drivers, the level that these drivers are driving at. And again, I'm talking about kind of both Lewis and Fernando at the same time. That's nothing to take away from their teammates who have also had great seasons. George Russell has had a fantastic season. Esteban Ocon has had a fantastic and consistent season. But I feel like Fernando, I think he has been unbelievable. And again, when you look at the race head-to-heads, when you take away, or try to take away the reliability issues, when both of the drivers got to the checkered flag, Alonso is 11-3 up on Esteban Ocon. And I feel like that just tells you the level that he was driving at when everything went well and when he actually saw the checkered flag. He also had, I think, more kind of wow moments in terms like moments of magic where I feel like Esteban was just really consistent throughout the season. Amazingly consistent, a great point scorer, but he didn't kind of, when the opportunity was there, I didn't see kind of as many moments of magic where you thought, if the day was really right, so we could have seen something seriously special by Esteban. He never gave me that feeling, whilst with Fernando, there was moments of magic. I mean, again, the qualifying in Canada, qualifying P2, and then the thing that everyone talks about, all of the bad luck that he's had. He has had more reliability-related DNFs than any other driver, 5 to be exact. And yeah, that's kind of the really big talking point from this season, and that's why I think when you take all of that context into account, Fernando's consistency has been just ridiculous. I mean, again, if you take away, and even if you look when he retired, like what position he was at, the amount of times where he's always been in the points is just ridiculous. And yeah, ultimately I feel like the big difference between, say, Mercedes and Alpine, where I think the Mercedes drivers had a really good relationship and worked really well together, whilst when the team knew that Fernando was leaving for Aston Martin, I feel like the tension in the team, especially between Ocon and Alonso, it just went to another level and obviously reached its peak in Brazil. So, but even throughout all of that kind of tension and frustration from Fernando Alonso, which did kind of boil over at the end of the season, obviously, there was some words that even he regretted in the media about Alpine. Obviously, he was just really showing his frustration after all of the reliability-related DNFs. But even throughout all of that frustration, Fernando has been, in my opinion, one of the drivers of the season in terms of magic moments, in terms of speed, in terms of consistency. And that is why, even though, like Lewis, he got beaten by his teammate, I don't feel like that's a fair reflection of the level that he is driving at, and that is what I've got Fernando Alonso in 4th place. I am very excited to see what he's going to be able to do in that Aston Martin if they give him a good car. Hopefully with the Mercedes power unit, they'll have better, at least, reliability. So yeah, Fernando, I feel like, the talk of his age, I mean, the guy's 41, I think, the talk of his age has gone completely out the window. His performances do the talking, and that is what we should be judging. And again, in terms of his performances and the level that he's been driving at, yeah, that's why I've got him in 4th place. Next up, and in 3rd place, I have got Charles Leclerc. Now, judging Leclerc's season, I think it's been a bit difficult because looking at kind of the season in context of where Ferrari were, 2-3 years ago and the progress that they've made, obviously Ferrari kind of in that sense, they've had a fantastic season to go from where they were in 2020 and then where they were in 2021, kind of the head of the midfield, and to genuinely be back and challenging for race wins. And at the beginning of the season, the championship with Charles as well, that is incredible. And I feel like Charles, especially at the beginning of the year, was driving unbelievably well when he was when we thought that we had, a championship fight between Charles and Max. And that is why, again, almost similar to Lewis and Fernando, I think the fact that he was fighting with Perez in the final race of the season for the P2 in the championship, I don't think the points that he scored, and I don't think the championship the championship standings at the end of the season, I don't think they truly reflect the level that Leclerc has been driving at, because don't get me wrong, he has not been the perfect driver. He obviously had those two kind of big incidents in Imola, and then also, of course, the crash in France as well. But I do also think that he's just been one of the quickest drivers, especially over one lap. Now, the stats that obviously really kind of, jump off the page for me is the wins and the poles disparity. Obviously, 3 wins this season after 9 pole positions. That is not good enough. And that's what both Leclerc and Ferrari, of course, need to look at and try and fix for 2023. But again, taking the context of the fact that I do think that Ferrari genuinely, they dropped off a massive amount. Clearly, the development was not there or not as fruitful as Red Bull's development in the second half of the season. And then all of the strategical and operational mistakes. I think taking all of that context kind of in the back of my mind, I do still think that Leclerc has been one of the drivers of the season. The speed of that guy has been unbelievable, and I still go back to the beginning of the season, because when we did think that we had a championship fight, remember, I mean, Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, those fights between, Max and Charles, he was more than capable of standing up to Max Verstappen, and we've seen the level of driver that Max is. So I still go back to that beginning of the season, and the pressure also, because it's one thing for Leclerc to be scoring podiums and even wins sometimes in the midfield. It's a whole different thing when you're given a race-winning car and potentially a championship-level car. And to me, Charles Leclerc more than stood up to the test of if he can handle and if he can hack the pressure of fighting for a championship. Now, again, he hasn't had a perfect season. I think even in the car sometimes, it's not just the mistakes, but I think what he hasn't been able to is kind of take the strategy into his own hands, like Sainz has, to be fair. At some point, when he hears that Ferrari are making a mistake, I think he's been almost a little bit scared to go against the team, and he almost blindly trusts them. So, and again, that's something that the driver and the team need to improve on. So it's a really weird one. But in terms of speed, I feel like Charles Leclerc is more than capable of challenging and winning a championship for Ferrari. And that is why he goes in 3rd place, because with all of that context, the pressure at the beginning of the season, I thought he did absolutely fantastic. But the way the season has petered out, the fact that the car just was nowhere near the RB18 by the end of the season, and some of their engine and reliability issues as well, I think that really kind of takes the shine off Leclerc's season. But when I look at his performances, when I look at him as a driver, he is undoubtedly one of the best drivers on the grid. And controversially, I think he might be kind of the quickest driver on the grid around one lap. His car control has been unbelievable at points this season, but for one reason or another, partly, due to him and also the team as well, that just hasn't translated into race wins, and it hasn't translated into a championship fight. And that's ultimately what they need to fix in 2023. But again, in terms of as a driver, I think he can deal with the pressure of driving for Ferrari. He can deal with the pressure of fighting for a championship, and he's got the talent to fight for a championship and beat Max Verstappen. So whilst I don't think it's been a perfect season by any stretch by Leclerc, I think he still had a really good season as an individual, and I still think that he is undoubtedly one of the fastest drivers in Formula 1. Next up, and in 2nd place, I have got Lando Norris. What a season he has had. Now, I think I said for the past 3 drivers that sometimes the points and where they are in the championship table might not represent or reflect the caliber of driver that they are and the level that they've been driving at in 2022. But with Lando Norris, I think it is more than a fair reflection. It's quite interesting because there's obviously this whole narrative around, it was quite a close fight between McLaren and Alpine, and then obviously the likes of Lando, Fernando, and obviously Esteban as well. But in the end, by the end of the season, Lando Norris is clear of Esteban Ocon in that Drivers' Championship, and I think that is a more than a fair reflection of how well Lando has been driving. Now, he's also been, actually, the thing about Lando is that I feel like he's had a boringly brilliant 2022 so many times in races, and actually Abu Dhabi was a perfect example where he has been driving at a level and so consistently that loads of the times he's kind of avoided all of the chaos and the carnage of the midfield. So he's been ahead of the midfield, but he's been behind obviously the top three teams because the McLaren just can't compete with those cars. And so many times this season, we just haven't seen Lando Norris. He's been kind of in a world of his own, and I mean that in a good sense, of course. So yeah, and again, Abu Dhabi was the perfect example of that. I did not see Lando once on the TV coverage, but that's because he just goes about his business in a really professional way. He looks like a driver that has, fought for championships and fought for race wins, and I feel like there's not much more that he can achieve in that midfield with what McLaren have given him until they give him a race-winning car, and that's why I've put him in second place, because he is, where he is in the championship standings is a very fair reflection of the driver and the level that he's been driving at. The only driver in 2022 to have a podium outside of the top three teams, and it was no surprise that when the opportunity presented itself, when, things went wrong for some of the bigger teams, it was Lando there to capitalize on the opportunity. And I feel like that is a very fair reflection and a good summary of his 2022 season. He has always been there, always scoring, big points when he can. And even though McLaren had a rough start, I don't think their car is actually as bad as even Lando tries to make it out to be. Reliability has been massively on their side. I do think that Alpine have a quicker car, but ultimately how you judge a car is the entire package, and reliability is a massive part of that. So I feel like McLaren have had a good car, not great car. And when it comes to, him and Ricciardo, I don't even want to mention Daniel Ricciardo because Ricciardo's in a world of his own. Lando is where that car is, and ultimately that car is a pretty decent midfield car with the reliability and the speed that Lando has shown. I mean, Lando Norris has retired Daniel Ricciardo. That's all you need to know. He's finished best of the rest by a mile compared to Esteban Ocon. And again, he's had a boringly brilliant season. He, to me, I'm just waiting to see him in a race-winning car to see what he's really made of when the pressure kind of ramps up another level. Yeah, I feel like putting him in second place is seriously a fair reflection of the caliber of driver that he's been. So yeah, in second place, I have got Lando Norris. Here we are then, coming in at number one, my driver of the season is Max Verstappen. Surprise, surprise. In terms of, when you look at Max's season, the two stats that just jump off the screen to me is the fact that he's had 17 podiums and 15 of those have been Grand Prix wins. 17 podiums and 15 Grand Prix wins. I just want to keep repeating that because that just underlines the level of dominance that we've seen from Max Verstappen in 2022. I've said it before, in terms of this season, the best driver in the best team with the best car. Do you know what's really interesting though is that even though the second half of the season has been kind of this big domination because Red Bull have developed really, really well, Ferrari and Mercedes, obviously Mercedes were never kind of on their level, but Ferrari kind of dropped off in the second half of the season. I feel like the reason Max to me is number one is not the dominant streak that he's had in the second half of the season, it's the fact that even by Hungary, Max Verstappen single-handedly, when both Ferrari and Red Bull had very similar cars, it was kind of track to track. It was, which driver and which team kind of gets their act together just a little bit better. We still had a championship battle in the first half of the season. And yeah, by Hungary, Max Verstappen single-handedly basically wrapped up the championship. And even Leclerc himself kind of said that, when they came back and when Max Verstappen had that dominant win, I think winning from 14th in Spa, Leclerc was like, yeah, that's when I knew the championship was over. So to me, that's why Max Verstappen is the driver of the season. It's not just the dominance because, when you look at dominance, again, which is what he showed in the second half, some people look at that in two ways. Some people think it's boring, and some people think that it's just the ultimate display of a driver and car in perfect harmony. But To me, the first half of the season, what he did to demoralize Ferrari, what he did to, again, win the championship by Hungary, in my opinion, and take it away from Ferrari single-handedly when both of them had similar cars, he answered the call. And it's that first half of the season that, to me, why he is the driver of the season. He single-handedly beat Leclerc, and Ferrari took advantage every single time Ferrari made a mistake, and obviously forced Ferrari into making mistakes because Max is so relentless and has been so relentless in 2022. And let's not forget where we were at the beginning. This championship was not a walkover until Max made it a walkover. So that is why, I don't have too much more to say about him. He's just been unbelievable. He won the championship in the first half of the season, and then, the second half with a dominant car, winning, almost every single race. And again, when it came to kind of beating Seb's record of, I think, 9 race wins in a row, the only race that got in the way was Singapore, when the team made a mistake. They underfueled him whilst he was on the pole position lap. If he would have been on pole in Singapore, he probably would have gone on to convert that into the race win. I don't think he's really made too many mistakes, so yeah, it's just been a flawless season from start to finish, kind of a tale of two halves as well, 2 different seasons, a championship battle that he won at the beginning, and then just a display of pure dominance in the second and greatness regardless in 2022. So yeah, undoubtedly for 2022, it's got to be Max as my driver of the season. Well, there you have it. That is my top 5 best drivers of 2022. Don't forget to let me know your top 5 best in the comments box below, and also keep a lookout for my next video, which will be my top 5 worst drivers, which is always a very fun video to do. Anyway, if you did enjoy this video and want to support the channel, then don't forget to subscribe. That is the #1 way that you can show your support, and I'll see you in the next one.